On a scenic hill overlooking the town of Rome in northwest Georgia, you have a very famous Civil War cemetery. And buried here behind me are 377 soldiers. Most of them are unknown, and the majority are Confederates, although a surprising number of Union troops are buried here as well. At some point during the course of the war, the doctor in charge of the hospitals run for the Army of the Tennessee issued an order that troops who were permanently disabled and very likely to die should be moved to Rome. It was close enough to the battle that soldiers could easily be transported there, but it was also far enough away that they believed that they would escape most of the carnage of war. Eventually, Sherman did make his way down to the area, and he ordered that the buildings on Broad Street be burned down as part of his march to the sea. However, he did make an exception for the hospitals. So buried here behind me, they believe might be upwards of 85 Union troops, mostly unidentified, who also were housed in the same hospitals. The Confederates would treat Union along with Confederate, and most of these would have, however, been Confederate. Now, at the same cemetery, you have beautiful memorials to the Confederacy. One of them a couple years ago was torn down, but I believe at the top of the hill is a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest. From the top of the Myrtle Hill Cemetery, you can truly see what a vital role this would have taken in any kind of defense of the city of Rome. And at the very top of the hill is a Confederate memorial to the soldiers who died here. And very recently, the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest was removed from the top, and there's talk of it being relocated to a museum. This is one of the Union troops from New York who, after the war, made his way back down to Rome and died here in 1906. And he's buried next to a couple of other interesting burials here who also mostly died after the war. On the left here, you have Colonel George Washington Lee, who, as Sherman was marching to the sea, carried the state records of Georgia, all of our archives, from Milledgeville to Augusta to keep them from federal troops. And on the right is another Confederate grave. He died during the war. It's unknown who he is, but in the early 1990s, his grave was found along the side of the highway there, and they kind of dug him up and brought him to another cemetery where he could be buried overlooking the war dead from the Atlanta campaign. Here's another very famous memorial to Nathan Bedford Forrest in Rome, Georgia. It says that on Sunday, May 3rd, 1863, he was at the end of a 3-day running fight and reached the town, telling them that 1,600 men were approaching. And it was because of this advanced warning that Nathan Bedford Forrest, with 410 men, captured Colonel A.D. Streight and their vastly superior force, and it saved Rome from destruction. And I believe that a few years ago the statue on top was toppled. The Myrtle Hill Cemetery was surprisingly recent at the time of the Civil War. It was only established a few years prior. In 1857, John R. Bullops died and was given this grave near the top of the hill. Now, something that's interesting is that the city of Rome taxed its citizens $3,000 to build a fort here called Fort Stovall. And at some point during the war, a musket shot hit the top of Stovall's grave, blowing the column right off. There wouldn't have been many graves at the time, and all new graves have kind of destroyed all the evidence of the zigzag trench pattern that used to be here, but this is probably the only war damage left at this cemetery.